chapter 4. We're going to go 17 through 26 and finish up the chapter 4 of Genesis. Today, we will study the genealogy of Cain. And there are a lot of things that we need to keep in mind as we study this. Well, let's read our text and then I'll get into it. We're going to start. Well, let's go up to verse 16 and then we'll carry on through. Or 17 is fine. I'm sorry, I get the guys all mixed up in the back. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And after Enoch was born, unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begat Mahulajel, and Mahulajel begat Methuselah, and Methuselah begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Adah bare Jabal. He was the father of all such dwell in tents, and of such that have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all that handled the harp and the organ. And Zillah also bare Tubal Cain, and instructor in every artifact of brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. Then we go on with Adam bore and Eve bore again, and she bare a son, and they called his name Seth. For God said, She hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, of whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and his name was Enos. And then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Today I want to spend some time on the first 8 verses of what we're looking at is the genealogy of Cain. And what we have to, there's so many things. When I read this the first time, I'm looking at this as wonderful people having a good time with a great family and all of this. And then I began to realize, well, we're talking about Cain's genealogy. And when you look at the genealogies, really all of the first 1,656 years, all of that is covered in 8 chapters of Genesis. 1,656 years is covered with Cain in 8 verses. And so you have to understand that what we're seeing happened over a long period of time. A long period of time. And I was reading this week, I just for information, to pull up how many people were on the face of the earth when the flood came. And it was amazing what people said. No one knows. You all understand that, right? There's no way to actually know the number. But it ranged from 750 million to 10 trillion. And then out of that 10 trillion, it kept going on with lower numbers. I mean, it's like, okay, how about just say 10 trillion even? How do you know that there's 10 trillion, 936 billion, 439? How do you get all of that? Where do you get that? I can't find that out. You know, I mean, there's people that study it. I guess they can. But how do you know that? Other things that we need to look at is I'm going to explain to you Cain's wife. How about that? How many of you know where Cain got his wife? You know, and there's some people that'll go way off the beaten path and come up with all kinds of ideas. But one thing what I want to talk about today is that Cain had a wife, and between the time of Cain and Seth was like 105 years. Understand something. When we look at the genealogy, if you want to put that up on there for me. You can't really see it very well. But when we look at the genealogy of Cain over here, you have Cain, Enoch, Arad, and those guys in Lamech, and then their children, and Naamah, the female. When you look at that, there's like 1,600 years. In the middle of all of that, there were hundreds of thousands of children born. So all God gave Moses, and understand Moses wrote this many, many years after after this period of time. And so what God gave Moses was a capsule of what was before the flood, just a capsule. And all you see in these names are those that perhaps were the most interesting, the most interesting that God, he pulled out. These were probably the most powerful men in that group. And in this group, we're going to talk about as we go on, not this week so much, but as we go on, this is from Seth on down to Noah. And we'll see that, but these are men that served God. These are men that were evil in every way, shape, and form. When we look at sometimes, I was reading through it a couple times and I almost had sympathy for the group and thinking, well, that's a nice group and they brought in and did some great things and things like that. But we have to understand they were evil. They were as bad and evil as they could possibly be. So what you have is one list of evil and one list of good. So when we read these 8 verses, we have to read evil. Now, just to encapsulate things here for you. Cain knew his wife. So Cain had a wife. Where did he get this wife? Okay, there's a couple things I want to just mention. Cain got his wife from his sister. Oh, no. That's not possible. How could that be? You can't do that. Understand that when Adam and Eve were created, they were perfect. They were perfect. Their genes, their everything within them was perfect. It was 2,500 years in Leviticus chapter 18 before God said it's not lawful for you to marry within your family. But understand, Abraham married within the family. Isaac married within the family. Jacob married within the family. So we can understand that up until that time, it was where else are you going to find a wife? And understand this, Adam and Eve had thousands of children. He lived 930 years. I don't know about you, but if they're still able to have children and you're still going 900 years from, you had a lot of children, and their children had children, and children had children, and children had children. So it was Cain got it from his wife. Now understand that there was as they began to have children and children began to marry within families, there was a recessive mutation that was taking place. And eventually, it comes to a point like today, if you marry within your family, it is very likely there will be defects within the child. That's because of recessive mutation. At least that's what I've been told. An example of that, and if you can Google it, it's not a very pleasant sight, but the Whitaker family in odd West Virginia are one of those families. Married within, they had children from brothers and sisters, and they are, well, people have made videos of them. It's a shame what that has done to them and their family. One man runs around talking like, he can't talk, he just gawks like a dog. It's just a very sad picture, but it's illustrative of the fact that we don't marry within our families today. That's not a good thing. But back then, families were perfect, and they began to digress or degenerate down through the years over thousands and thousands of children. So that's where Cain got his wife. And it says here that Cain, he built a city. But he didn't build a city until he had a son, and he named it after his son. Why didn't Cain name the city after himself? Because Cain was known of being hateful and being infamous. He hated God, and so he didn't name the city after himself. He named it after his son. And then it says Enoch was his son, and you're going to notice a lot of names that intercross. That Seth, down his lineage, there was an Enoch, and not a Lamech, but a Lamech and a Lamech and a Lamech. In the other, well, I guess it is Lamech. In the other one, so you'll see that the genealogies may have some of the same names and all. But here we have in verse 17, it said verse 18, and Enoch bore Irad, and Irad begat Mahulajel, J-L, and Mahulajel, he begat Methuselah, and they begat Lamech. And so what we have in this verse is we're getting down to Lamech. Lamech is going to be a key figure through the next few verses. Lamech is going to be, if you look in your notes to the next page, I want to just read something to you. And sometimes I read things and I'll turn it into my own way of saying it. But I can't do any better than what Matthew Henry does. And Matthew Henry, as a matter of fact, I was told many, many years ago, if you don't have any commentaries, have Matthew Henry. And if you don't have that, have Matthew Poole. And there are thousands of commentaries today, but these are two of the best. And Matthew Henry writes, one of Cain's wicked race is the first recorded as having broken the law of marriage. Hitherto one man had but one wife at a time, but Lamech took two. Worldly things are the only things that carnal, wicked people set their hearts upon, and are most clever and industrious about it. So it was with this race of Cain. Here was a father of shepherds, a father of musicians, but not a father of the faithful. Here was one that teached about brass and iron, but none taught about the knowledge of the Lord. Here are devices on how to be rich and how to be mighty and how to be merry, but nothing of God, of his fear and service. Present things fill the heads of most. Lamech had enemies whom he had provoked. He draws a comparison betwixt himself and his ancestor Cain and flatters himself that he is much less criminal. He seems to abuse the patience of God in sparing Cain in an encouragement to expect that he may sin unpunished. So that gives you a capsule of what we're studying today. These are wicked individuals. Cain, his family were wicked. And so what you're seeing in these names of men, these were the most wicked of that era in time. And it says Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of one was Adah, and the other Zillah. And these 2 wives bare him children. Now, Adah's name means ornament or beauty or brightness, the dawn. Zillah is shade or shadows. Their names mean pretty much are what they were, kind of what they were. And Adah bare Jabal, and he was a father of such that dwell in tents, and of such that have cattle. He was a farmer. He was a farmer that would travel. In other words, he had cattle and he would dwell in tents, and he was kind of a nomadic tribe type individual. He just traveled around wherever he went. His cattle would eat the grass, and then he would move on and go somewhere else. But he was known for that. He was the father of that. He established that. That's good, right? He was an evil man. And it says here, he means stream of water, others to flow, to walk, descriptive of nomadic life. Dwelling in tents indicates no permanent resident. Jabal was the leader of those who managed cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He's the father of all that handle the harp and the organ. I thought, well, that's great, an organ. They had an organ before the flood. Well, that word just means a beautiful instrument. I was thinking about that. If you were going to, I understand these are the first people on earth. And if you were going to make let's say, man, I can bend this stick, and if I can get some twine from something, I could make a bow, a bow and an arrow, I could. And so they were learning as they went. And understand, millions of people during this period of time. And so that would be understandable. And how would you build, so you take an instrument you take something like that, and then all of a sudden you thump it, hey, that makes a sound. And if I bend it a little bit, it makes more of a sound. And so he was a musician, and he made instruments, and he played the instruments. And that's what he did. And nobody knows what the organ was. He was the founder of music and musical instruments. And Zillah bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor in every artifact or artifactor of brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. When I was thinking about Tubal-Cain, I was thinking he was so proud, or they were so proud of this, they gave him Cain's name. He was evil. And they gave him the name of evil Cain. Cain may have been added later, as I've said. His trade was a worker in iron and brass. He perfected that, bending and shaping and making swords and implements to use to dig up the dirt and things like that. He was a man probably of great wealth. And then I look at his daughter, and why did they give her name? Remember when we look at the children of Leah, Jacob's first wife, and we look at the children of Leah, and we see Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah, and then we see Issachar. After a period of time, each one of the children had children. You had Gad and Asher and Naphtali and Dan, and then you come back and you had Issachar and Zebulon, and then Leah had another child named Diane. Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. And Dinah caused some problems. And this is why, when I think about the name there of Naamah, I thought about, her name is beautiful. And I thought about loveliness, pleasant, beauty. I thought about, here was the model for women. She was an example to women how they could look. Anybody know anybody like that in our world today? They're actually billionaires now. Examples of lewdness. And yet people fall over themselves to try to be like them. Anybody know who that might be? Huh? The Kardashians. Well, Naamah was the Kardashian of the people of Cain. Now, sometimes I wish we could strike things that I say over the. But I mean, what else could she be? Why else name her? Her name indicates her beauty. Why else give us her name if that wasn't some part that she exhibited to others? And I think that it would have been very likely that she could have been that type of a person. And then we come to Lamech here, and this is a song in the Bible. It's the way this is worded. People have made it into a song. I'll give you a little example there. He had two wives, Adah and Zillah, and he says to them, "Hear my voice." And I'm kind of like listening. Here's a man. What I'm trying to picture with Lamech is, let me see if I can think of a Bible character. Well, nothing comes to mind right now. But Lamech at this point he comes in as a loud, boastful individual. He's coming in before them, and he is going to boast about his ability to kill people and go unpunished. He has given an example of fighting a couple people, and they may have hurt him, but he killed them. In other words, he took his revenge, or he took his anger to the extreme. He probably instigated the fight. And I can see him standing there before his two wives and bragging to his two wives, and perhaps he has a sword or a bow and arrow or something that's there, and he stands before his two wives proudly boasting, "I have killed two men. And if God punished my father, Cain, sevenfold, then I'm 10 times better. 70 times 7. 10 times better." What a proud and boastful individual he must have been. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. He mocks God. Well, let's leave that picture of evil. When I study evil, I'm glad to get away from it. I'm glad to study something different. What a brightness these next two verses bring to us. What a joy it is to see God working. What a joy it is when you're in the dark and it's midnight and you see the light. What a joy it is. There's nothing more beautiful than daylight coming up over. When I'm at the ranch, I see it coming up over the trees and the shadows begin to change. Oh, it's beautiful. When I'm home, we'd have our bed in such a way that I can look out the windows and I can begin to see the sky turn a pinkish red as the sun begins to come up, and it's just beautiful. This is, to me, leaving Cain and his genealogy and going to Seth, and God giving us an example of righteousness is great. Is great. It's refreshing. Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth. Now, this is 105 years later, something like that. And so look at chapter 5 and verse number 4. I think that's what it is. It says, in the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. And he begat sons and daughters. Throughout all of this time, that 100 years, they were not unactive. That's not the right way of saying that. Let me change it. They were active. They had children. They had boys. They had girls. What I see when I see this is God pulling out of those children his child, Seth. And when you go through the Bible, you'll find many, many times, like I illustrated it with twins, how God didn't choose to bless necessarily the firstborn, but the secondborn. God's the one that makes the choice. David, how many children did Jesse have? How many children? Some say 7, some say 8. David was just a pup out taking care of the sheep. He's out there with a little guitar singing to the sheep. And out of all of those children, God chose David to be in the lineage of Christ. And this is the same way I see with Seth. Out of all of the children that Adam and Eve may have had up to this period of time, God pulls Seth out. And if you go to, I think the very Matthew, anyways, it's one of the last verses of the genealogy, you'll find Seth. He is in the genealogy of Christ, and these families right here are in the genealogy of Christ from Noah on. And so we find Seth, and Seth here is, actually here another thing, Eve names the children. This is kind of unusual for what we have had in the later years. But anyway, Seth is born. His name means, compassionate or compensation. The name is derived from placing or setting in the stead of another, Gesenius in his Hebrew lexicon. For God said unto her, God said, she hath appointed me another seed. And it's Elohim is the word God here, which he is the ruler and the judge. And another seed, he's talking about Gesenius, Seth. Now, and Seth had a son, in verse number 26. He had a son born to him, and he called his name Enos. And this is unusual because the name Enos here, it says it's a name that means frail, weak, feeble, mortal, miserable man. But it's the sorrows of human life is what it's illustrative of. Anyways, Enos is born, and then it says men began to call upon the name of the Lord. That's amazing. That also that there, men didn't call upon the name of the Lord before Seth. I don't know. But it says after Enos was born, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. They had built a relationship with God. They were unashamed and openly calling upon the name of the Lord. To call upon the name of the Lord is to pray fervently, to worship earnestly, to live a life pleasing to the Lord. One who calls upon the name of the Lord does not fear to tell others about the Lord. Have you ever went to tell someone about the Lord, or God give you a heart and said, speak to that person, and you didn't? You kind of feared, well, I don't want to upset him, I don't want to talk to him. I can say that my wife has no problem with that. She is handing Bibles out all the time. But, there's that time when you have that fear. It says here, they did not fear to call upon him. Evil was taking place all around them, just as many evil as there was righteous. And actually, when it's all said and done, Noah left with only he and his family, 8 people. 8 people. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. 8 people out of millions, billions perhaps of people, 8 people survived the flood. That's amazing. That's amazing. Think about that. Evil takes over. How fast and swiftly evil takes over. And now look at the world situation today. People today are thinking Lenin and Marx are great, wonderful people. And they murdered thousands, millions. No, we live in an evil world today that need to know Jesus. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. That's what we need today. We need a revival. How's that going to happen? How does a revival happen? It's funny because many revivals happen when elderly people fall on their face before God and beg God for revival. I read stories of revival, and it's always amazing how God moves in the midst of people. It can happen. It can happen today. It can happen with us. Well, onward, forward to chapter 5 next week, and we'll get into some exciting things as we go forward. I never enjoy studying Cain and evil. Father, thank you for this wonderful day. What a great day that you've given us today. I pray you'll bless these wonderful people. May we be used to honor you today. Bless Brother Han as he brings the morning message. Lord, he's excited after being away and hearing all the good preaching. And now he's coming to give us a vision of what this church can do for you in this city. In Jesus' precious name.